I'm going to finish this sermon series how we started it. Do you remember? Two men, advanced in years, both led very different lives. One married with children and grandchildren, the other divorced 4 times. The first, a greasy mechanic going through the routine of daily life year after year, and the other, a multi-millionaire with a reluctant assistant. But both diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Take a look at this clip.
What are you doing?
What is this?
Come on, give it back.
What is it?
Give it back.
It's on the floor. I didn't know it was a state secret.
My freshman philosophy professor assigned this exercise in forward thinking. He called it a bucket list. We were supposed to make a list of all the things we wanted to do in our lives before we
Kick the bucket. Cutesy.
Anyway, I wrote down things like make $1 million, first black president, young man's wishes. I was gonna redo the list, but then...
Help a complete stranger for the good. Laugh until I cry. Not to be judgmental, but this is extremely weak.
Well, it's pointless now.
I would argue the exact opposite. All right, that's it.
What are you doing?
Little rewrite, that's all. I mean, don't you want to go out with some balls, guns blazing, have a little fun?
It was not supposed to be about guns blazing or anything like that. You're missing the point.
Missing the point, hey? Has anyone seen this movie, The Bucket List? A few of you. Who's got a bucket list? Things to do before you kick the bucket. Has anyone actually written it down? Couple. I know Reese did. I remember hearing a few of the items on his list a few months ago when he was sharing. I love hearing other people's bucket list because it shows their spark for life. It shows their personality. And I think that in making this sort of list, you've got to face the reality that your life here on earth doesn't last forever. And that maybe you want to experience things, specific things, before you kick the bucket. For those of you who are visiting or perhaps have missed the last few sermons, this week's message is the last in a line in a series called If God Wrote Your Bucket List. As a pastoral team, we wanted to present perhaps a few thought-provoking challenges or ideas for you, and hopefully challenge you along the way in thinking about your own life and what goals you want to set with God's desires for you and your life in mind. So let's recap. First week, Linnell shared with us, be a godly legacy. When your tombstone is erected, what will the dash between your birth date and your death date represent? Will it be a godly legacy that you leave behind? Number 2, as Reese reminded us, remember you are saved and sent. He reminded us of our true calling, Jesus' great commission, to go and make disciples. Number 3, Mladen shared with us, have an undivided heart. He suggested God's greatest desire for us is that our whole heart is to be given to him, rather than divided amongst the different things in our lives. Number 4, Kendall shared on this one, unlocking secrets of generations past. Again, a similar idea of legacy, but perhaps from the other end. He reminded us how we can learn from our past, looking at our pioneers and those who have gone before us, to learn from them. Number 5, I shared on knowing your shepherd. If you remember the illustration of the ancient relationship between a sheep and their shepherd, and the difference between knowing about your shepherd and working for your shepherd versus actually knowing him, spending time with him, which is what God so deeply longs for, that relationship. Next, Roger shared on being your brother's keeper. He looked at the stories of Jesus in Luke and gave us a challenge to join Jesus in that mission to a world that is desperately in need, to build community through small groups. And finally, Kendall shared, jump in puddles. He brought out the point that there can be joy in the storms of life when we put our hope in Jesus. I think one of the most attractive things about the concept of a bucket list is that it gives one a sense of purpose. For the remaining time of your life, do you have something to chase? Do you have a reason to live, an item to cross off? Do I have any list makers in the house, just in general? I know I am an avid list maker. JP knows it at school. We'll be sitting there talking about all the things we've got to do, organise, cross off, discuss. And I'll pause in mid-sentence and I'll say, wait, I have to get my post-it pad, otherwise I'm going to forget all of this. I have to write it down. My shopping list is on the inside of my Tupperware cupboard in the kitchen. The pen is there ready to jot down anything that I run out of in the moment. Otherwise, I get to Woolies and completely and utterly forget what I'm needing at the time. Now, maybe it's a shameful thing to admit that I'm scatterbrained at times and that I need to write something down in case I forget. Now, kudos to all of you who don't need to do that. But I prefer to think of my brain as a Safari browser. I'm being productive and efficient. I just have too many tabs open to keep track of them all. Am I right, ladies? But whatever the list, they all have a purpose. And I think everyone at some point in their life asks one of two questions, depending on their belief structure. It's either simply, what is my purpose in my life? Why am I here? My bucket list, the things I want to achieve. Or, what is God's purpose for my life? I know I've asked that at certain times. It's a version of the age-old, almost comedic question, what's the meaning of life? It's become the enigma of humanity, the mystery that everyone is trying to unlock. Why do we exist? What is the reason behind all the cells and atoms that make up everything we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell? Why does education matter? Why do Australians follow this seemingly endless pattern of work during the week, party on the weekend, or sleep? One of the two. What makes you laugh? What makes you cry? What is the meaning behind all of this? Is there a meaning? There are many theories, but it really comes down to the most fundamental question of whether or not a creator God exists. You see, there are massive ramifications that stem from whether or not you believe in God. Think about this thought-provoking statement by Ty Gibson. If God does not exist, let's put that hypothetical out there. If God does not exist, then human beings are nothing more than biological animals, mere material creatures governed by the instinct of self-preservation, here today and gone tomorrow. To accept this view of human identity would be to accept that life has no ultimate meaning, that the moral categories of good and evil do not actually exist, that all our notions of compassion, justice, and goodwill are false constructs that we've made up, and that love is merely a powerful illusion. It's quite a ramification to think about. And so, people believe that there is no ultimate meaning in life. And yes, they will admit that, oh yes, there's right and wrong, and there's moral judgment and justice, as they see these as a pillar of society. But they won't quite go as far as to say that there is a God who rules such things and that he is the baseline. And so we end up with this purposeless society, trying to conjure up meaning in the average lifespan of 82.8 years. Thanks, Wiki. Just look at what we feed ourselves. Movies titled The Pursuit of Happiness or The Rat Race. There was an athlete who had reached the pinnacle of his sport. He was once asked what he wished someone would have told him when he first started playing his sport. And he replied, "I wish that someone would have told me that when you reach the top, there's nothing there." It's a sad statement. The world offers many answers to this question. I typed it into Google, actually, and the first response that came up said, "Uncover the most important discovery you will ever make in this Scientology book." I clicked on another link, quotes about meaning of life, and ended up with this from author Henry Miller. "Life has to be given a meaning because of the obvious fact that it has no meaning." Perhaps a hollow perspective. This man was a little more direct. Deceased novelist Michael Crichton thinks that the purpose of life is to stay alive. Watch any animal in nature and all it tries to do is stay alive. It doesn't care about beliefs or philosophy. Whenever any animal's behavior puts it out of touch with the realities of its existence, it becomes extinct. So now we're just animals? Purposeless? Thanks, Google. I personally prefer to look at the world a little differently. I think it's clear that we all have a need to feel wanted, to feel like you have a worth, and ultimately have a purpose in life. You're here for a reason. And my belief in a God of the universe makes everything click into place. And here's why. I want to share another quote with you from C.S. Lewis in his book, Mere Christianity. He says this: "What Satan put into the heads of our remote ancestors was the idea that they could be like gods, could set up on their own as if they had created themselves, be their own master, invent some sort of happiness for themselves outside God, apart from God. And out of that hopeless attempt has come nearly all that we call human history: money, poverty, ambition, war, prostitution, classes, empires, slavery, the terrible long story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy." The everyday bucket list. He continues, "The reason why it can never succeed is this: God made us, invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on petrol, and it would not run properly on anything else. Now, God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other." When I was in grade 10, I had a Bible teacher who gave us an assignment. She said to write a one-page description of our belief in what the meaning of life is. I liked the sound of that. To put into words the reason behind my personal whole existence. So I started in the first place that I could think of, the Bible. So if you have your Bibles with you today, I invite you to open them, and we're going to turn to Ecclesiastes. It's a great book. This is the first thing I found in my search for meaning. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 2. Give you a moment to find it. Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. If you don't have a Bible, please feel free to grab one from up the back on the rack. And if you don't own one, to take it home with you. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. He says that word a lot, so I decided to look it up. The direct Hebrew translation is that of breath or vapor. But more specifically, the unit of air that passes in and out of the lungs through the mouth and nostrils, with a focus on its briefness and lack of content. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. But hang on, we're not looking at Google here, we're looking at the Bible. So how does that make sense? It sounds like the Bible is claiming that there's no meaning to, well, everything. Ecclesiastes is an amazing book, and I challenge you to read it all the way through. And what the author is saying, if you do keep reading, is that he tried everything the world had to offer. Everything that he could find that the world said, this will fill you up. This will give you a purpose. This will make everything make sense. So if you come down with me to chapter 2, verse 11, he says, "Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun." So this led my grade 10 self to believe that it's not about me at all. It's not about what I do, what my goals and dreams and bucket list items are at all. It's about God. There are 2 key verses in the Bible that I want to look at with you today that change everything in this debate. The first is right at the beginning of the Bible. So turn back with me to Genesis 1. I think this verse makes everything sensical. Genesis 1 verse 27. "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female, he created them." You've probably heard that verse before. Okay, so we're made in God's image. But what exactly is that image? And the key is right at the end of the Bible. So if you quickly turn to 1 John with me. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 8. There's a lot of times in the Bible where God gives us a thought, a concept, and a challenge. And then later in the Bible or in a different spot, he gives us the key to unlock that passage. So this is the key. 1 John 4 verse 8. It says, "Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is," finish it for me, "love." Think about that logic for a second. If we are made in God's image, and God's image is the very definition of love, then we therefore must be created to give and to receive love. That's it. That's what I see as the purpose in life. Love and be loved. A coming-of-age drama film came out in 2012. It's called The Perks of Being a Wallflower. And I saw a clip of it recently where one of the main characters, a teenage girl hurt from past relationships, asks the question, "Why do I and everyone I love pick people who treat us like nothing?" Her friend replies, "We accept the love we think we deserve." It's a very true statement, unfortunately, due to our human nature. But the good news is that it's flawed. We accept the love we think we deserve. A few years ago, I was standing in church during the worship songs down at Avondale College, and I don't remember what specifically was going on in my life at the time, but I remember that I was really struggling with something. And that Sabbath morning, I had walked in the doors of church feeling empty, feeling drained, spent, worried, and uptight. And God showed me a picture that morning that stopped me in my tracks, and it stayed with me ever since. About 4 rows in front of me, I was sitting near the front, and 4 rows in front of me stood a woman. She was holding her sleeping baby on her shoulder. She was rocking from side to side and singing along with the worship music. Now, I couldn't see her face, but it wasn't her that struck me. It was the baby. I don't know the last time you held a baby, felt its weight in your arms, stroked their fat cheeks. That little cherub had the softest, smushiest, most peaceful looking face that I'd seen in a long time. And in that moment, I realized that I was that baby, that I could be that baby, and that God was the mother. See, right at that moment, I felt completely dependent and helpless in my own current situation. But God reminded me in that moment, in that baby's face all pressed up on its mother's shoulder, that all I have to do is simply relax in his arms to be loved. Maybe you feel like you only deserve partial love, if any. Perhaps you feel that no one in your life has ever shown you unconditional love. Sometimes it can be hard to accept love because you don't know if you can trust the one that's offering it. I get that. And to you, I want to share with you a quote from possibly the second most beautiful book in the world, Steps to Christ. Ellen White writes on page 10, God has drawn our hearts to him through various means. Through nature and the deepest and tenderest love that human hearts can know. He has tried to tell us about himself. Yet these do not perfectly show his love. Even though God has given us all of these evidences, Satan, the enemy of good, has blinded people's minds so that they look upon God with fear and they think of him as hard and unforgiving. Satan tries to make people think of God as a severe judge without pity. He says that the Creator is always watching for people to make mistakes so that he can punish them. To show them that this is not true, Jesus came to live in this world. He wanted people to see God's infinite love. He wants us to relax like that baby. Right in his arms, the arms that proved once and for all to the entire universe how much he loves us. And then he wants us to share that love with the people around us. 1 John 4:19 and 21 says, we love because he first loved us. And this commandment we have from him, that he who loves God must love his brother also. See, Jesus spent his whole life showing us what loving others meant. It's completely opposite to what the world suggests. You see, Jesus said, love your enemies, turn the other cheek, pray for those who persecute you. Live and love selflessly and authentically was his message, just like he did. And the evidence of that, if you go down a little bit further in 1 John 5 verse 2, it says, by this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and keep his commandments. You see, it's a cycle. You love God, you love others. You love others authentically, you're loving God. It just keeps going. Love and be loved. The ultimate bucket list item. So with the reality of life and inevitable death, the grand meaning of life question is one that everyone must face at some point. And as you ask yourself this question, think of the way that you are living your life as a Christian right now. Is your love for God evident in your actions to others, showing love to them? And if you haven't made a decision for Christ, I invite you to think about the purpose and identity that you can find in a God who loves you beyond measure. So my challenge to you today as a conclusion to this series is to live loved and live loving. If anything goes on your bucket list, it should be that. I invite you to bow your heads with me. Father God, you are love. You are the very definition of love, and you created us as your children in your image. It's like genetics. We take on what our parents give us. So Lord, that's why we crave love. That's why we want to be accepted and to belong and to be in community. So I pray that as we go from here this morning, you would fill us with a sense of your presence and your love, that you would make it known in our deepest of hearts and that God-shaped hole in us, that only you can fill that. That your love is enough, that your love provides the purpose and hope and meaning in our life. And help us to remember that in every situation, in work, in school, in study, in everyday life, Lord, to share that love with those around us. That is our mission here, to bring others into your kingdom through your love. Thank you so much for dying on the cross and showing us that ultimate expression. Help us to never forget that. I pray these things in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen.